The hand that clamped down on Charlotte's arm was a steel trap. She didn't even have time to scream. Her feet slipped on the polished marble of the service hallway as she was dragged, not into an office, but into the blinding white, tiled glare of a staff bathroom. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked, a sound as final as a casket closing. "I've been looking for you, Charlotte." Alexander Hernandez leaned against the door, not even breathing hard. He wasn't angry. He was amused. He calmly straightened the cuffs of his $1,000 suit. "Or should I say, Mrs. Saul?" he said, his voice smooth. "Did you really think I didn't know who you were? Who you've been this whole time?" Charlotte's blood turned to ice. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. This wasn't a random bust. This was a trap. He knew. He had known. "My brother," she whispered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "Your brother was a loose end," Alexander said, his voice casual, as if he were discussing the weather. He stepped closer, backing her against the cold tile wall. And now, his hand suddenly shot out, gripping her by the collar and slamming her back. "So are you." He pinned her, his forearm pressing hard into her throat. "Give it to me," she choked, clawing at his arm, her vision starting to flash. I don't know what you." His hand tightened, cutting off her air. Stars burst behind her eyes. "The drive," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "The one in your apron. Give it to me now and I'll make this quick. For Gabriel's sake. He's a good businessman. He'll understand." This was it. This was the end. This was the stupid, reckless moment her husband, Gabriel, had warned her about. The moment her burning need for revenge had finally cost her her life. She could see her brother's face, smiling at her. This should have been the end of Charlotte's story. But Alexander, for all his meticulous planning, had just made one fatal, life-ending mistake. He assumed Gabriel Saul was just a good businessman. He didn't know that Gabriel was standing on the other side of that door. He hadn't been sitting at table 9, waiting for his wife. He had been in the shadows of the service hallway. He had followed her, his heart sick with a terrible, cold dread. He knew she couldn't let her brother's murder go. He had told her, begged her, to let him handle it his way. But Charlotte's grief was a fire he couldn't control. And now, listening to the muffled choke, the sound of her struggling for air, he had heard enough. The lock on the door wasn't just a simple knob. It was a heavy-duty deadbolt. But a deadbolt is just metal. And with one silent, practiced movement, a thin, flexible steel tool in Gabriel's hand found the pin. The lock slid open with a faint snick. The door didn't swing open. It moved just an inch. Just enough for the man in the hallway to see inside. And what Gabriel Saul saw, the billionaire's hand on his wife's throat, was not a business problem. It was a death sentence. This is the moment the city would later remember as the beginning of the war. Come, let me take you back to where it all began. But first of all, welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're listening, hooked, and already enjoying the story, please hit subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing our community around the world. Tomorrow I'm dropping another sweet story, so don't miss it. And the first 4 people to comment with their real names will be featured in our next story. Now, let's continue. 1 year ago, Daniel was alive. He was 24, all bright smiles and messy hair. A genius coder who still called his big sister Charlie. He was the only family Charlotte had left in the world. The one pure, good thing in her life. And he had just landed his dream job at H Corp, working under the legendary Alexander Hernandez. Charlotte had never liked it. She and her husband, Gabriel, lived in a world of shadows, and she knew a shark when she saw one. Alexander Hernandez was a predator, all polished teeth and empty eyes. He's a visionary, Charlie, Daniel had argued, his eyes shining with excitement over dinner. We're building things that will change the world. Just be careful, Danny, she had warned, smoothing his hair. Men like that, they don't have friends. They only have tools. For 6 months, everything was perfect. Daniel was thriving. He was buying his first apartment. He was happy. Then he called her. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Charlotte was asleep next to Gabriel. The phone buzzing on her nightstand jolted her awake. Danny, she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. Charlie, I messed up. Oh God, Charlie, I messed up so bad. His voice was a raw whisper, tight with a panic she had never heard before. She sat bolt upright, Gabriel instantly awake beside her. Daniel, what's wrong? Where are you? I'm at the office. I found something. It's not right. It's blood money, Charlie. He's moving. Oh God. He was sobbing, a choked, terrified sound. I wasn't supposed to see it. It was a locked file, but I got in. He's a monster. A cold dread, colder than anything she had ever known, washed over her. Danny, listen to me. Get out. Leave your computer. Leave your phone. Walk out of that building right now and take a cab to my house. Do not stop. Do not talk to anyone. Do you understand me? Okay. I'm at my desk. I'm going. I'll see you in 20, Charlie. I love. The line went dead. Just cut. Daniel? She yelled into the phone. Daniel! She was already out of bed, pulling on clothes, as Gabriel was grabbing his keys. He's at his office. Something's wrong. They drove, breaking every speed limit, her heart trying to escape her chest. But they were too late. When they got to the H-Corp tower, the street was already flashing with red and blue lights. An ambulance was parked at the curb, but it wasn't moving. The lights were on, but no one was rushing. A paramedic, his face pale and tired, stopped them from running to the door. You can't go in there, he said, his voice flat. My brother! Charlotte screamed, trying to push past him. Daniel! He's in there! The paramedic put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Son, he jumped. From the 40th floor. I'm so sorry. He didn't make it. Charlotte's world dissolved. She didn't feel Gabriel's arms catch her as her legs gave out. All she could hear was that word. Jumped. She knew her brother. He was happy. He was excited about life. He was scared, yes, but he wasn't suicidal. And Daniel was afraid of heights. He wouldn't even stand on her balcony. He didn't jump. He was pushed. The next day, the police ruled it a suicide. Case closed. Alexander Hernandez even issued a heartfelt press release mourning the tragic loss of a brilliant young mind. But Charlotte saw the truth. This was murder. That was the night her grief turned into something else. Turned into a cold, hard, patient rage. Gabriel held her for days. Let me handle it, he had pleaded, his own voice raw with a quiet fury he rarely showed. This is my world. I will find the proof. I will make him pay. But Charlotte shook her head, her eyes dry and burning. No, you'll handle him your way. Bullets and back alleys. I'll handle him mine. This started with a computer. It ends with one. I'm going to take everything from him. I'm going to get the proof and I'm going to watch his whole world burn. For Daniel, she created her new life. Charlotte Miller. She studied the restaurant, faked a resume, and got a job as a waitress. And for 6 long, agonizing months, she had served coffee and cocktails to the very man who had murdered her brother. She had listened, she had watched, and she had waited, until tonight, Tonight, she had finally found it. A new hidden server. She had plugged in the diamond-shaped USB drive, and in 3 minutes, she had downloaded his entire secret life. She had the proof. And now, with his forearm crushing her windpipe, she knew he had been watching her, too. The world was shrinking to a single, burning point. Charlotte's vision tunneled, the bright white tiles of the bathroom blurring into a haze. Alexander's forearm was a bar of steel across her throat, and the only sound she could hear was the frantic, useless hammering of her own heart. He was right. This was it. She had been stupid. She had let her grief for Daniel make her reckless. "I'm sorry, Gabriel," she thought, her fingers weakly trying to claw at the man's hand. "I'm so sorry." And then she heard it. A sound so small, so impossible, it had to be a hallucination. A faint, metallic snick. It was the sound of a high-security deadbolt being professionally, silently, and expertly picked. Alexander, lost in his moment of victory, his face inches from hers, heard it too. He froze. His head snapped toward the door. "Who's there?" "I locked that door." The door didn't fly open. It didn't burst from a kick. It swung open slowly, smoothly, and with a terrifying, ghost-like silence. Gabriel Saul filled the entire doorway. He wore a tailored black suit, but the tattoos covering his neck seemed to pulse with a dark energy in the harsh fluorescent light. His face was perfectly, unnaturally calm. It was the face he wore when he was deciding who was going to live and who was going to die. His eyes didn't even look at Alexander's face. They were locked, like a targeting system, on the billionaire's hand and forearm, pressed against his wife's throat. The shift in the room was instant. The air, which had been hot with Alexander's rage, suddenly became ice-cold. Alexander Hernandez was a man who moved armies of weapons. He had bodyguards. He had killers on his payroll. But this was different. This was Gabriel Saul standing 3 feet away in a locked room. This was not a business problem. This was a predator. Alexander's hand dropped from Charlotte's collar as if it had been set on fire. "Gabriel," Alexander stammered, taking a clumsy step back. He held his hands up, a pathetic gesture of peace. "This isn't what it looks like. This is a misunderstanding." Charlotte fell back against the wall, her lungs burning as she dragged in a desperate, ragged breath. She coughed, her hand instinctively flying to her apron pocket, making sure the drive was still there. Gabriel didn't respond to Alexander. He didn't even look at him. He took 2 steps and was in front of Charlotte, blocking her from Alexander's view. His hands, large and warm, gently framed her face. His eyes, which had been ice, softened as they scanned her. "Are you hurt, Lena?" he whispered, his voice a low rumble, using the name only he ever used for her. She shook her head, her voice a raw, painful rasp. "No, I'm fine." She met his gaze, and her fear was instantly replaced by the same cold rage he felt. "I have it, G. I have everything." Only then, after he was sure she was okay, did Gabriel Saul slowly turn around. Alexander was flattened against the opposite wall, his eyes darting between Gabriel and the door, realizing he was trapped. The arrogant, amused CEO was gone. In his place was a terrified man in an expensive suit. "You killed her brother," Gabriel said. It was not a question. It was a statement. "No," Alexander said, too quickly. "That's insane. The kid. It was a tragedy." He was troubled. He jumped. "The police? The report." Gabriel took one slow, deliberate step toward him. Alexander flinched, shrinking back. "I don't care about the police," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "I don't care about the report." He took another step. He was close enough now that Alexander was trapped in his shadow. But you just put your hands on my wife. Gabriel's hand moved. It was not a punch. It was too fast for that. He simply grabbed the front of Alexander's suit, twisting the material, and slammed him back against the tile wall. The sound of his head hitting the tile echoed with a sickening thud. Alexander cried out, a small, pathetic sound. This was business, Gabriel hissed, his face inches from the terrified CO's. You were moving in on my territory. You were a problem to be managed. But you! He slammed him against the wall again, harder. You made it personal when you killed her brother. And you just signed your own death warrant when you touched her. Gabriel's other hand began to rise, his fingers curling into a fist that could break stone. He was going to kill him right here, and neither of them cared about the consequences. Gabriel, wait. Charlotte's voice, though hoarse, cut through his rage. He stopped, his fist trembling, but he didn't turn. He hurt you, Lena. And you'll kill him, she said, stepping forward, her hand on his arm. But not like this. Not fast. She looked past her husband, her eyes locking on the terrified billionaire. The fear in his face was good, but it wasn't enough. He took Daniel from me, she said, her voice dripping with venom. He staged it. He humiliated him in death. He called him troubled to the press. A simple death is too good for him. She looked at Gabriel. We do it my way, the way we planned. We take his company. We take his money. We take his name. We leave him with nothing but a jail cell and the memory of how he lost it all to the powerless waitress he tried to kill. Gabriel's breathing was heavy. He stared at Alexander for 1, 2, 3 more seconds, the desire for violence at war with the love for his wife. Slowly, his fist uncurled. He let go of Alexander's suit, and the CEO crumpled to the floor, gasping. Gabriel straightened his own suit jacket, not a speck of dust on him. He turned to Alexander, who was cowering on the white tile. Get up! Alexander scrambled to his feet, shaking. You're going to walk out of this bathroom, Gabriel said, his voice now calm and flat. You're going to go back to whatever party you were at. You're going to smile, and you're going to pretend this never happened. Alexander just stared, confused and bleeding from a small cut on the back of his head. Enjoy your last night as a king, Gabriel said, a cold smile touching his lips. Because my wife, the woman you thought was a nobody, just took your entire empire. And starting tomorrow, we're going to tear it apart, piece by piece. He opened the bathroom door and held it for Charlotte. She walked out, head held high. As Gabriel followed, he paused in the doorway and looked back at the broken man. And Alexander? He added, his voice friendly. If you ever come within 1,000 feet of her again, I won't let her stop me. Now have a good night. He closed the door, leaving Alexander Hernandez alone, the silence of the bathroom suddenly more terrifying than any threat. The war had begun. The ride down the elevator from the restaurant was silent. The air between Charlotte and Gabriel was thick, not with anger, but with the humming intensity of a high-voltage wire. When the doors opened to the private garage, Gabriel didn't lead her to his armored sedan. He led her to a matte black motorcycle tucked in the corner. They'll be watching the car, he said simply. He handed her a helmet. She got on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, pressing the USB drive that was still in her pocket against his back. As they sped out of the garage and into the cool night air, she felt the last of her fear burn away, replaced by the cold, clear focus of the hunt. They didn't go home. They went to a nondescript office building in a part of town that didn't sleep. It was one of Gabriel's clean offices, a high-tech nerve center hidden behind the facade of a defunct shipping logistics company. Inside, Marco and a team of 3 computer specialists were waiting. They looked up as Gabriel and Charlotte entered, and the room went still. "He knew," Charlotte said, her voice still raw. "He knew who I was. He was waiting for me." Gabriel's face was grim, which means he has a contingency. He thinks he can survive this. He looked at Charlotte. "Show them." Charlotte walked to the main terminal, her hands steady. She plugged in the diamond-shaped drive. He had a secondary server air-gapped from his main network. It's his personal ledger. His lifeboat. The team's lead analyst, a young woman with a shock of red hair named Kira, began to type. Files blossomed across the wall of monitors, and what they saw made even Gabriel's blood run cold. It wasn't just the financial crimes, the billions in laundered arms-dealing money. It was worse. There was a folder labeled Loose Ends. Kira's fingers flew, decrypting the file. A list of names appeared. Journalists, politicians, business rivals. And near the bottom, one name that made Charlotte stop breathing. Daniel P. "He kept a record," Charlotte whispered, her hand rising to her mouth. "He kept a record of the people he's killed." "He's arrogant," Gabriel said, his voice a low growl. "He thinks he's untouchable." "There's more," Kira said, her own voice shaky. "There are subfolders, memos, payments, and, oh my God, video." A new window opened. It was grainy, time-stamped from a year ago. It was from a high-angle security camera. It showed Daniel's office. Charlotte watched, her body rigid, as 2 large men in suits entered. She saw her brother, Daniel, look up from his desk in terror. She saw the struggle. She saw them drag him to the window. "Turn it off," Gabriel commanded, his voice breaking. He moved to block Charlotte's view, but she put a hand on his chest. "No," she said. Her voice was hollow, dead. "I'll see it. I have to see it all." She watched for 2 full, agonizing minutes. She watched them break the window. She watched them hold her brother, his legs kicking, out over the 40-story drop. And she watched as Alexander Hernandez himself walked into the frame, leaned down, and said something to Daniel that she couldn't hear. Then Alexander nodded, and they let him go. The room was silent, save for the hum of the servers. Charlotte stood still for a long time. She did not cry. The woman who had gone into that bathroom in fear was gone forever. The woman who stood here now was an executioner. "Kira," Charlotte said, her voice clear and cold, "isolate the audio on Alexander. I want to hear what he said." Kira's hands trembled. She isolated the track, filtering out the background noise. She replayed the last 30 seconds. Alexander's voice, clear and casual, filled the room. "You should have listened to your sister, kid. She's smart. You're just a liability." Gabriel closed his eyes. The last thread of his control snapped. "Marco, get the team. We're going back to the restaurant. We're ending this tonight." "No." Gabriel turned. Charlotte was looking at the screen, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said, finally turning to him. "He has a contingency. He expects you to come for him with guns. He's probably got a dozen bodyguards waiting. He thinks this is your game." She tapped the screen, pointing at the financial ledgers. "He's wrong. This is my game." She looked at her husband, and for the first time he saw the full, terrifying force of her intelligence. "He took my brother's life. I'm going to take his. But first, we take everything else." Her eyes met Gabriel's. "I don't just want him dead. I want him erased." A slow, terrible smile spread across Gabriel's face. He had never been prouder. "Tell us what to do, Lena." The takedown, 72 hours. Day 1, the panic. At 9:01 a.m., the moment the stock market opened, Charlotte's plan began. An anonymous tip, sent from a secure server in Eastern Europe, was delivered to the inbox of a notoriously ruthless investigative journalist. It contained only the financial data, the arms deals, the money laundering, the secret offshore accounts. At 9:30 a.m., a separate, encrypted package was delivered to the SEC. At 10 a.m., Alexander Hernandez sat in his office, drinking coffee, when his CFO burst in, his face sheet white. The stock was in freefall. A credible report of massive, high-level fraud was circulating. H-Corp had lost 20% of its value in an hour. Alexander laughed it off. He called his brokers. "This is a rumor, a market manipulation. Buy back the stock. Short sellers are trying to panic us." But his brokers were silent. The SEC had just announced an emergency halt on all H-Corp trading, pending an investigation. Alexander felt the first cold prickle of sweat on his neck. Day 2, the betrayal. Alexander's world was shrinking. His contingency was a network of powerful partners and politicians. He spent the entire day on the phone, calling in favors. "This is a witch hunt," he yelled at a senator. "I can't help you, Alex," the senator replied, his voice cold. "The evidence it's overwhelming. My office is being flooded with calls." What Alexander didn't know was that Gabriel's team had been busy, too. They had sent a different set of files, the arms-dealing manifests, to Alexander's rivals in the underworld. By noon, 2 of Alexander's largest protected shipments had been accidentally intercepted and seized by rival organizations. By 3 p.m., his partners in the illegal arms trade, believing he had betrayed them, had cut him off completely. He was isolated. His legitimate world was terrified of him, and his criminal world wanted him dead. He tried to move his personal money. He called his bankers in Zurich. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hernandez," the banker said, his voice polite. "There appears to be a hold on your accounts. A request from international authorities regarding, well, it seems multiple homicides." Alexander hung up the phone. He was no longer a king. He was a rat in a trap. And he finally knew who had built it. Charlotte. Day 3, the end. He was in his office. He hadn't slept. He was surrounded by security, but he knew it was useless. He was a dead man. The police would come for the fraud. Gabriel's men would come for his life. He was pouring a glass of whiskey when the elevator to his private office dinged. His bodyguards tensed, drawing their weapons. The doors opened. Gabriel and Charlotte walked out, alone. The bodyguards looked at Alexander, confused. He just stared, his hand shaking. "It's fine, Robert," he said, his voice hoarse. "Let them in." Gabriel and Charlotte walked across the vast, expensive carpet. They looked not like victims, but like the new owners. "How?" Alexander whispered. "How did you do this in 3 days?" "You built your empire on paper," Charlotte said, stopping 10 feet from his desk. "I just filed for its demolition." You ruined me," he hissed. "Are you happy? Is this the revenge you wanted? You're no better than I am." "We're not here for your confession," Gabriel said, looking at his watch. "We're just here for the show." "What show?" Alexander barked, a flash of his old arrogance returning. "You think you can just walk in here and—" He was cut off by the sound of sirens. Not 1 or 2, a dozen. They were wailing at the base of his tower. "That," Charlotte said, "is the city's homicide division. It seems they also received an anonymous tip." Alexander's face went white. "Homicide? That's circumstantial. You can't prove that. It was a suicide. The report." "You're right," Charlotte said. "The ledgers and financial crimes will tie you up in court for a decade. But I'm not that patient." She pulled the small, diamond-shaped USB drive from her pocket. The one from the restaurant. "You see, Alex," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't send them everything. I kept one file just for this moment. I sent them the ledgers, the payments, but I kept the video." She plugged the drive into the port on his giant desk monitor. His face, his own horrified, screaming face, filled the screen. "This," she said, "is for the detectives when they walk through that door. This is for the jury. This is for the world to see what you really are." Alexander stared at the screen, at the image of him leaning over Daniel, and he finally, truly broke. He let out a sob, a broken, animal sound. The elevator dinged again. This time it was armed police officers. They flooded the room, their guns pointed at Alexander. "Alexander Hernandez," the lead detective said, "you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel." Charlotte didn't stay to hear the rest. She didn't need to. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Gabriel stayed for 1 second longer. He leaned over Alexander's desk, close to the sobbing, broken man. "She's smart," Gabriel whispered. "You should have listened to her." He then turned and followed his wife. The epilogue. It was sunrise. They hadn't slept. They stood on the small hill overlooking the city, at the cemetery. The grass was still wet with dew. Charlotte knelt, her hand tracing the letters carved into the simple, granite headstone. Daniel P. Mason, beloved brother and son. She placed the small, diamond-shaped USB drive on the grass, right at the base of the stone. "We got him, Danny," she whispered. The wind was the only reply. For the first time in a year, the fire in her chest wasn't rage. It wasn't hate. It was just gone, leaving behind a vast, quiet, aching emptiness. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She felt a hand on her shoulder, large and warm. Gabriel stood beside her, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up, watching the sun crest over the skyline of the city they had just broken and remade. He didn't say, "It's over." He didn't say, "You were right." He just stood with her, a silent partner, a quiet shield. After a long time, she stood up, her hand finding his. He laced his fingers through hers. "Come on, Lena," he said softly. "Let's go home." She took one last look at her brother's grave, then turned her back to it. Together, they walked away from the shadows of the past and into the pale, new light of the morning.
Thank you for listening all the way. Your support means everything. Subscribe, leave a comment with your real name and where you're from, and you might see your shout out in the next story. You never know, the next one might just change you.